watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Anne. Darren's been in touch. Morning, Darren. Can you say a quick hello to my beautiful wife, Fiona, and daughter, Sophie, as they're travelling back to Walney Island, Barrow-in-Furness, this morning to see family? We'll miss them as they'll be gone for a week.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Message duly delivered.
Yeah, my Auntie Gwyn and my Uncle Bob both live on Walney Island.
Oh, I was going to say, that must be near your part of the world, mustn't it?
It is. There's a street on Walney Island called... There's a street called Leopard Street.
Ooh.
Everyone calls Leopard Street.
Leopard. Yes.
Yeah, funny. Leopard.
That's like Hyacinth Bucket being called Hyacinth Bouquet.
Go to Leopard Street. There you go. Anyway, newspapers, should we?
I think so. Let's take a look at the front pages. So, what have we got first? There's anger at Rishi Sunak's hardline plans for immigration, according to The Independent. Oh no, that's the Sunday Times we're looking at there, isn't it? They're saying...
Oh, it's no longer feasible.
It's no longer feasible to be a full-time GP all over their front page.
Yes. Let's see what the next one is. It's a bit of a guessing game. Sunday Telegraph, yes.
No, that's the Express.
The Express.
We did take back control. Boris is sort of leading his legacy, I think he's saying. For 3 years, we've been sticking up for you. We got things right. We got all the major things right.
Right. Is it The Independent next? No, it's The Observer. There you go. Travel chaos is the new normal, it says, after Brexit.
And let's see what we've got next. The Independent, their anger at Sunak's hardline plans for immigration.
Yeah. And the Mail on Sunday says Liz Truss is focusing on immigration as she'll send more Channel migrants to Africa. Oh, that was like a...
That was like a lottery.
It was like a lottery, wasn't
waiting
it?
for the little balls to come up, the headlines instead.
There you go. Let's have a look through them in a bit more detail and hopefully a bit more organised with journalist and author Ella Whelan and political commentator Andre Walker. Good to see you both. How can we... The Sunday Telegraph, Ella, is talking about winter blackout.
How can things get any worse? Really?
Oh, they can. This is something that's been talked about and threatened for a while. There's always been, because of the fact that we know that there is a fuel crisis, and indeed those of us at home should be getting ready to look forward to bills that come October could be up to £3,244, which is unbelievable. And throughout the European Union, countries have been asked to cut their gas usage by 15%. And so far, the UK has not gone down that route, but the Telegraph reports that it has seen documents that show contingency plans for us to do something similar. The National Grid has been in meetings looking at whether or not they're going to ask individual users to basically switch off the lights, switch off the heating, at a time when we know, let's remember we do have very cold winters in Britain. People always forget this, particularly now when we're going through a heat wave. But the winter can be horrendous. I mean, it can be lethal for people in this country. There are several solutions that have been floated around, whether or not companies ask industrial users to turn off to turn things off overnight or turn things off at certain times to stop basically us individuals from being affected. And there's also, the government has asked coal-fired power stations to stay open that were due to be closed, gas storage facility, which is off the coast of Yorkshire, to be reopened. So all the kind of green plans to basically completely phase out dirty fossil fuels is having to be thrown out the window because we literally cannot keep people warm.
But I drive into London at 3:30 or so in a morning, and every tower block is ablaze with light. The very idea that they're going to talk to us householders, who will be turning off our lights anyway because we'll be terrified of the bill, while they're not doing something about these huge users of electricity. I mean, why are tower blocks completely ablaze with light at 4 o'clock in the morning?
Well, very. Do you know the honest answer? They get the security to walk around, the lights turn on automatically. You used to have a bloke with a torch, but now they don't do that. But I find it extraordinary. I used to work for the Member of Parliament for Morecambe, and obviously I don't speak on his behalf, but we had a nuclear power station there. You had gas offshore in the Irish Sea, you had wind power, you had wave power, you had the ability to frack under Bowland. We have the ability to produce enough cheap energy in this country, but instead what we've done is obsessed over green technology, and people have forgotten that for every single wind turbine you have, you need a gas turbine to back it up, because when the wind drops, it needs something to switch on quickly. We've got ourselves into a real mess. I genuinely think if we supported the the idea of moving technology forward rather than returning to windmills, we wouldn't be in this position. And I think it's really, really sad that we've ended up in a position where we're plunging people into poverty. The idea of £3,200 a year is staggering.
It's staggering. Morecambe, is that David Morris?
I introduced you. That's how we know each other.
Didn't he used to be in a boy band?
No, he used to be a guitar
What are
player.
you two talking
He
about?
used to be a guitar player for Rick Astley. Yeah, the MP for Morecambe used to be Rick Astley's guitar player.
Good Lord. I didn't know that.
We met on the terrace.
We did meet on the terrace. That's a long time ago.
A long time ago.
Oh, I used to hobnob round the Commons, you know.
Oh, that's the terrace.
Oh, the terrace, yes, the terrace. There you go. Now, you picked cheery stories for us this morning. Let's have a look at the Daily Star Sunday, Andre. Funeral costs rise.
Yes, everything else is
Well,
going up, so is the cost
fuel.
of cremation.
Yeah, do you know something? It's really just the same story, but actually it's a really sad situation simply because we're now talking about even cremations, which are supposed to be the cheaper option. A lot of people are going for that, particularly in the south of England, where the cost of burials is absolutely huge. But £1,000 for a cremation. The average funeral now, you ready for this? £4,800. Now, look, I'm not being funny, but in the middle of a cost of living crisis, you know, you're worried about your children, you're worried about the cost of food and clothes and whatever, and then, no disrespect, but granny or granddad dies, and you get whacked with a bill for £4,800.
It doesn't have to be that expensive.
It doesn't have to be, but that's the average. And so, you know, I mean, my mother's funeral, which, you know, what was it? A church, 2 cars and a burial. You know, that was sort of £6,000. These figures do add up very, very quickly. But of course, as I say, the cremation option of £1,000 to me seems absolutely extraordinary. And the critical point was that the figure has gone up by £160. But by the way, there's something else on this page which I thought was hilarious. They're talking about saving money by getting a cheap barbecue deal from a high-end butcher. Listen to this. You can get a T-bone steak, you can get 2 dry-aged rump steaks, 4 burgers, 2 sausages, and 2 pork chops for £96.
Oh,
I mean, that's horrendous. I can't believe they're saying that's a bargain.
No, that's not a bargain. And
No, I can't believe they
Too
put it
much
on the same
red meat in
page.
there.
Sorry about
I
cremation.
was just thinking that as I started talking.
Honestly, you can hire coffins now, can't you? That's the thing.
But Steve, I don't understand why people don't. You know, the reality
Oh,
is
I'd hire one.
the cost of all these things is so extraordinary. And at the end of the day, what are you going to do? You're going to either burn it or put it in the ground.
But you can get cardboard coffins. That would explain why there are so many adverts on the television at the moment about cheaper cremations.
But cardboard coffins and wicker coffins are basically as expensive as wooden ones.
Are they?
Yeah.
Cardboard ones?
Yeah, even the cardboard ones. But if you hire a coffin, they sort of put you in something and then they just
Lift you out
of it.
I mean, you're not going to be
Makes
too
sense to
bothered,
me.
Will. With all due respect, you're not going to be too worried either.
No.
Well, you aren't personally, but
No.
your family might be, I suppose. Should we go to the Sun, Ella, and cruel rail strikes?
Yes, so obviously we know that rail strikes are coming up, and we saw the disruption that they caused last time around. I'm someone who's in favour of, I support the strikers because I think that if you look at the way in which the Sun is reporting it, one of the union bosses has been called cruel, and he says critics describe it as a selfish, cruelly timed and cynical manipulation of a landmark national event because this particular strike that's coming up is happening at the same time as the Commonwealth Games. And I suppose the only thing I'd say is that strikes are meant to be disruptive, and strikes are meant to make a point, which is that at times of great need of a service, like like running the railways, workers leverage their power and prove to bosses that they're necessary. It's relatively pointless to have a strike on a time when no one is getting the trains and no one needs to use transport. But to be fair to the Sun, they point out the fact that the RMT, they say that the RMT has walked away from this deal that has been put forward, which is a 2-year 8% pay deal. But what the RMT says is that one, that doesn't even nearly meet with the kind of levels of inflation that we're seeing, and it basically amounts to a real-time pay cut for workers. But there's also one of the things that often gets missed is that a key part of these rail strikes are about redundancies and about compulsory redundancies, and part of the deal that's been offered to workers doesn't involve a guarantee against redundancies. So, yes, there's going to be disruption, yes, it's going to be fairly miserable for certain people, but But on the other hand, as the RMT and lots of their supporters say, if more people followed the process of going in, supporting a union and leveraging their power in this way, perhaps they'd get better deals in their workplaces.
No, perhaps we'd all
But
be
if you
bankrupt.
remember,
Well, Mick Lynch and Eddie Dempsey, who are two representatives from the RMT, have been doing the media rounds in the last few weeks and very solidly pointing out that, in particular in relation to the railways, there is a phenomenal amount of money swimming around in terms of bosses' take-home pay, and to basically have workers being penalised and threatened with redundancies while they're, as Eddie Dempsey put it, having a disco. I mean, you can understand how individual workers would see that as unfair.
if you cast your mind back to when rail workers, or tube workers rather, wanted to strike during the Olympics, which I thought was a real disgraceful thing to do. They were striking about the whole concept of moving people out of ticket offices and onto the platforms. I would argue that the vast majority of people who now use tube trains will tell you that it's a better situation to have these guys mingling amongst the customers on the platform. And actually, what was happening was this strike, which, by the way, they got £1,000 each to work during the Olympics, was simply opposing something that was demonstrably an improvement in service. And I just feel that when you've got a dispute about your terms and conditions, I understand that, but effectively what you're doing is you're bullying the Commonwealth Games because you just don't like moving into the modern world, and I think that's where it becomes
Well, hang on, be fair, Andrew, this is about redundancies. It's not about moving workforces to a different platform. And we know that the government has just brought in, there was announced that they're bringing in new legislation to allow companies and bosses to bring in agency workers to break strikes, which is remarkable.
Fantastic.
I don't think it's fantastic. I think that's, if you look at a situation in which the government is cracking down on protests, making people being able to have their voices heard, and now bringing in agency workers to break strikes, you're moving to a situation in which, when things, we've got a cost of living crisis, and there's lots of people who are facing completely impossible situations in their work and home life, and you've got a government that says that you can do nothing about it.
But when you're talking about that thing on protest, remember what they're talking about. There is no prohibition whatsoever on you walking down the street with a placard. What they're simply saying, and why I agree with it 100%, is if you stand outside a butcher's with a megaphone for 3 weeks screaming murder at people, that's not a protest, it's simply harassing the customers.
It's a noise clause.
No, but
protests are noisy.
But you look at our friend in Parliament Square, Steve Bray. His intention is to prevent media outlets, including this one, to be able to properly interview people he disagrees with.
That's protest.
That
It's
is
very
protest.
annoying.
That is the intention there is simply to harass people out of disagreeing with him, and that's not a protest.
Okay, we've got to leave it there.
We've let you disagree. It's been a bit like Wimbledon.
Like that, you've had a little rest, haven't we?
Yeah, exactly.
Ella, Trey, thank you. We'll see you next hour for Ding Dong number 3.
Yes.